Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, research, and fascinating insights and distill them into the most important nuggets of knowledge.
And today we're plunging into a topic that, well, it's always bubbling just beneath the surface, isn't it? Power.
Exactly. Despite our modern ideals of civility and fairness, power often operates in, shall we say, less obvious ways. We're talking about Napoleon's famous advice, wielding an iron hand in a velvet glove. It's all about influence, strategy, and really understanding the hidden rules that govern so much of how we interact.
It's a paradox we live with daily, really. Outwardly, our society, it values transparency, democracy, equality. We aspire to be decent and fair.
We do.
But if you take those rules too literally, if you play too strictly by them, you can quickly find yourself, well, outmaneuvered. Maybe even crushed by those who aren't quite so scrupulous.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable truth.
The game of power, with all its underlying darker emotions, greed, envy, lust, hatred, it hasn't fundamentally changed much since the days of ancient courts. It just wears different clothes now.
And to help us navigate this fascinating and sometimes, let's be honest, unsettling landscape, we're diving deep into a really monumental work, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
Ah, yes, a classic.
And this isn't just a collection of historical anecdotes, is it? It feels like a profound exploration of human nature, specifically through the lens of power dynamics.
Exactly right. And Greene's motivation for writing this book is quite personal. He's very open about it. He states that he was inspired by individuals in his own life who, quote, skillfully used the game of power to manipulate, torture, and cause him pain.
Wow, that's quite a starting point.
It is. But remarkably, he says he bore them no grudges. Instead, he found this profound inspiration to understand the mechanisms they used. It's a unique perspective, isn't it? Seeing manipulation not as a reason for bitterness, but, well, for intellectual curiosity.
That's a fascinating twist.
It really is. And he even thanks his parents, Lorette and Stanley Greene, and his cat Boris, for their support during the writing process. It kind of grounds the book in a very human experience, even though the subject matter can feel quite cold and calculating at times.
What's truly remarkable about this book, though, is its foundation. It isn't just Greene's personal reflections, right?
Not at all. It's a masterful distillation of wisdom drawn from centuries of historical figures and philosophical traditions. You've got Niccolo Machiavelli, obviously.
The class.
Sun Tzu, Karl von Clausewitz, Plutarch, Balthasar Gracian. The list goes on. The bibliography is extensive. Greene takes these historical narratives, these lives, these strategies, and he extracts the enduring dynamics of power.
So he's stripping away the surface details, the specific context.
Exactly. Stripping away outward appearances to reveal the underlying strategies that have worked and failed across millennia. It's truly a cross-cultural, cross-historical examination of human influence.
It sounds like it functions almost as a historical guide to human behavior, showing these repeating patterns.
That's a great way to put it. Patterns that repeat regardless of the era or the political system. It's about understanding the game of power, how it's played, who excels at it, and importantly, what happens when its rules are ignored or misunderstood.
And Greene argues pretty strongly that to operate effectively in the world, you must grasp these hidden laws.
He does, whether you want to play the game offensively or just defend yourself.
Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack these laws. We want to give you a shortcut, really, to being truly well-informed about how power actually works behind the scenes.
And this isn't about endorsing every single tactic, is it? Some of them are quite ruthless.
Definitely not. It's about equipping you with greater awareness so you can navigate complex social situations, professional landscapes with your eyes open.
We're going to explore not just what these laws are, but how they've been applied throughout history. The stories are incredible.
And crucially, why they continue to resonate. Why do they still prove effective, even today? It's about understanding the game, whether you choose to actively play it or perhaps just defend yourself against those who do.
Exactly. And to begin, we really need to address the foundational principles that underpin all these laws. The first, and maybe the most basic, is just acknowledging that the game of power is always present. It doesn't just vanish because we wish it would.
That's the modern paradox you mentioned earlier. On the surface, we promote civility, decency, democracy, fairness, Wonderful ideals.
Absolutely.
Yet underneath, as Greene puts it, the same dark emotions, greed, envy, lust, hatred boiled and simmered, just like they did in those glittering, dangerous courts of old.
The game is fundamentally the same. It's a constant struggle for influence, for resources, for control, no matter how polite the facade might seem.
This brings us to a really crucial concept Greene discusses, the so-called non-players.
Yes. The ones who claim to opt out.
Right, the individuals who present themselves as morally superior, as if they're above all these machinations, these power games.
And Greene warns us, quite pointedly, to be wary of such people, because ironically, he says they're often among the most adept players at power. They just use strategies that cleverly disguise their manipulations.
That's a truly counterintuitive idea, isn't it? So how does that work? They display weakness.
Often, yes. They might display weakness or a lack of power as a kind of moral virtue. They might publicize their supposed powerlessness to gain sympathy or respect or deflect scrutiny. It's a very subtle, deceptive strategy. Greene links it directly to Law 22, the surrender tactic.
So they throw dust in our eyes, as he says, distracting us from their own subtle power, placed with this air of moral superiority. Can you think of a more sort of everyday example of how that might look? Weaponizing perceived powerlessness.
Sure. Think of maybe a colleague who constantly talks about how overwhelmed and overworked they are. They gain sympathy, maybe admiration for their martyrdom, but subtly, tasks get shifted onto others. They appear powerless, but actually control the workflow through managing perceptions.
I can see that.
Or think of a public figure who constantly emphasizes their humble beginnings, their lack of traditional connections, their outsider status. They use this perceived powerlessness to build a populist base, portraying themselves as fighting against the powerful, all while skillfully orchestrating their own rise to power.
Right. Playing the underdog while actually playing the game very effectively.
Exactly. It raises that fundamental question. Can you truly opt out of the game of power? Or is it just an inherent, unavoidable part of human interaction? Greene suggests that since almost all human actions are aimed, consciously or unconsciously, at gaining some form of power or influence, those who make a big show of their moral qualities are often the most skillful at indirect manipulation, even if they don't realize they're doing it.
And this leads right into another foundational principle Greene hammers home: the critical importance of appearances and deception.
Yes, he makes a bold claim here. He asserts that humanity's unique ability to lie and deceive is almost like a privilege of the gods. He even references ancient myths like Gilgamesh, where great heroes were judged partly by their ability to rival the craftiness of the deities.
So deception isn't inherently ugly or immoral in this context. It's a necessary skill.
In the pursuit of influence, yes, that's the perspective he presents. Francesco Vettori, a contemporary of Machiavelli, actually wrote about this. He marveled at the varied arts, the industry with which people sharpen their wits to deceive others, and he concluded, through these variations, the world is made more beautiful. A provocative thought.
Very.
So power, in this view, absolutely requires the ability to play with appearances, to wear many masks, as Greene says, and keep a bag full of deceptive tricks. Because in the realm of power, what you seem to be is often far more important than what you actually are.
Which means you have to be constantly watching, constantly observing. You can't just take people at face value.
Absolutely not. Greene emphasizes the need to study everyone, including friends and loved ones, and crucially to never trust anyone completely. People are infinitely complex. If you don't observe carefully, you remain in the dark about their true intentions, their weaknesses, their hidden motives. You're flying blind.
And all this constant observation, this understanding of appearance, it fuels the final foundational principle you mentioned, taking the indirect route.
Yes. Power, Greene argues, is best achieved not through direct confrontation, which breeds resentment and resistance, but through subtle, circuitous planning. He uses that great analogy of a billiard ball.
Ah, the caroming ball.
Exactly. Caroming multiple times before hitting its target. Your moves need to be developed in the least obvious way. Why? To avoid resentment, to avoid resistance. If people don't realize what you're really doing until it's too late, they can't easily resent you for it or effectively resist your will.
It really is a masterclass in psychological maneuvering, isn't it? Almost like warfare fought with perceptions.
It is. And incredibly effective, according to Greene and the historical examples he provides.
Okay, so with those foundational principles laid out, the ever-present game, the danger of non-players, the power of appearance, constant observation, and the indirect route, let's dive into some of the specific laws. Where better to start Then law number 1, never outshine the master. This one feels almost primal.
It is, and arguably the most critical and maybe the most frequently violated because it taps right into fundamental human insecurity. The judgment here is crystal clear. Outshining your superior is, quote, the worst mistake of all in the power game.
Worse than incompetence.
Often, yes. Because those in high positions crave security and, maybe even more importantly, a feeling of superiority.
Mm.
Any perceived threat to that, even an unintentional one, will likely be met with swift, often ruthless reprisal, even if it's never spoken aloud.
So it's not just about doing a good job. It's about making the boss feel good, feel secure, feel superior.
Precisely. They don't just want competence. They want to feel indispensable themselves. They want to feel like the sun and you, a mere star.
And we see this play out so spectacularly, tragically almost, with Nicolas Fouquet, Louis XIV's finance minister.
Oh, Fouquet, a classic example.
He was brilliant, indispensable, clever, but he also loved lavish displays. He loved showing off his wealth and taste.
His fatal flaw.
When the prime minister, Mazarin, died, Fouquet naturally assumed he was next in line. Big mistake. Louis XIV, feeling perhaps overshadowed already, decided to abolish the position entirely.
A power move in itself.
Totally. And Fouquet, feeling insecure, maybe trying to regain favor, decides to throw the most spectacular party the world had ever seen at his chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte. Ostensibly, it was to honor the king.
It had everything, right? Exotic food, specially commissioned music, even a new play by Molière premiered there.
An absolutely magnificent display. So why did it backfire so spectacularly? It was meant to honor Louis.
Because the party, intended as a tribute, inadvertently perhaps, highlighted Fouquet's immense wealth, his exquisite taste, his own considerable power. It made him seen, in that moment, superior to Louis XIV himself. Louis felt upstaged, diminished, infuriated. Within weeks, he had Fouquet arrested on trumped-up charges of embezzlement. Fouquet spent the rest of his life in prison. And who did Louis replace him with?
The bland Colbert.
Exactly, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Competent, yes, but deliberately chosen because Louis considered him less brilliant, less charismatic, and therefore less threatening. The subtle insight here isn't just about Fouquet's wealth. It was his style, his effortless grace, his taste. He made power look easy, and that deeply offended the king's own hard-won, carefully constructed sense of majesty.
Wow. So it's not just about what you possess, but how you carry it, how it makes the master feel in comparison.
Precisely. It's all about managing the master's ego, their insecurities.
Now, contrast that disaster with Galileo Galilei. He needed patronage, right? From Cosimo II de' Medici in Florence.
He did. And he could have tried to impress them with his latest telescope, his scientific breakthroughs.
Yeah.
That seems logical.
But he didn't. He understood something deeper about the Medicis, about power, about patrons.
He understood their desire for glory, for legacy, for associating their name with something eternal. So instead of showing off new scientific gadgets, which might have made the Medicis seem like mere patrons of invention, almost like tradesman Galileo linked their name to the cosmos itself.
He discovered the moons of Jupiter.
And he named them the Medicean stars, dedicating the discovery to Cosimo and his brothers.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant. In one stroke, Galileo secured his position. He got a full salary as the court philosopher and mathematician, no teaching duties required. He understood that masters ultimately don't always care about empirical truth or scientific progress as much as they care about their own name, their own glory, their immortality.
By associating their family name with the heavens, he gave the Medicis infinitely more perceived glory than any new scientific gadget ever could.
He satisfied their vanity, their deep psychological need for superiority and lasting fame. The key takeaway for you listening is that true influence often comes from fulfilling someone's deeper, often unspoken psychological needs, their vanity, their desire for glory, their insecurities, rather than just delivering on the explicit requests or showing off your own talents.
The Spanish courtier Baltasar Gracián absolutely nailed it. All superiority is odious, but the superiority of a subject over his prince is not only stupid, it is fatal.
Such a great quote.
He uses that analogy of the stars in the sky. They might be brilliant on their own, but they never appear in the sun's company. They just fade into the background.
A perfect metaphor.
But what about the reversal? Is there ever a time to outshine the master? What if your boss is, well, incompetent, a falling star?
That's the crucial exception. The reversal is key. Greene says you can discreetly outshine a master if they are indeed a falling star, very weak, on their way out, losing their grip. In such cases, there's little to fear from subtly hastening their downfall, maybe outdoing them at key moments, positioning yourself as the successor. But, and this is important, you must exercise caution. You don't want to appear cruel or overly ambitious or spiteful. That can backfire.
So subtlety is still key, even then.
Always. And if the master is still firm, still powerful, patience. Absolute patience is key. Power naturally fades. Time erodes everything. If you play the long game correctly, you will likely outlive their reign and eventually outshine them. It's all about timing and accurately gauging their strength and your own position. You want to emerge as the rising sun, not just a briefly brighter, easily extinguished star.
That idea of managing perceptions, especially with superiors, leads us directly into how you manage relationships more broadly. Because sometimes, paradoxically, those closest to you can be your biggest blind spot, your greatest danger. Which brings us, rather uncomfortably, to law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
Yes, this one definitely goes against the grain of our usual social norms, doesn't it?
It really does. Trust your friends. That's what we're taught.
But Greene's judgment here is stark, almost brutal. Friends, he argues, will betray you more quickly, more readily, precisely because they are friends. Why? Envy. Familiarity breeds contempt, or at least envy.
Whereas former enemies,
If you turn them into allies, can actually prove more loyal. They have more to prove. They're often more grateful for the opportunity. They have less hidden envy because the relationship starts from a point of acknowledged conflict, not presumed affection.
Greene even provocatively states, if you have no enemies, find a way to make them.
He does. It echoes that cynical line, often attributed to Voltaire. Lord, protect me from my friends. I could take care of my enemies. There's a deep vein of historical precedent for this perspective.
And we see this illustrated so vividly, tragically again, in the story of the Byzantine Emperor Michael III and his best friend Basilius.
Right. Michael was in a perilous situation, needed a trusted advisor. Who did he turn to?
Basilius. His stable hand, his drinking buddy, someone he loved and trusted implicitly, but who had zero government experience. He chose friendship and perceived loyalty over competence.
A fatal error in the game of power. Michael promoted Basilius rapidly, showering him with titles and responsibilities. He ignored warnings from others.
Because he trusted him. So this raises a really interesting question that comes up again and again with these laws. Why do leaders, even smart ones, so often fall prey to misplaced trust or mercy or sentimentality in moments where cold pragmatism seems required? We saw it with Shang Yu later, too. What's going on psychologically?
It could be several things. Sometimes it's the intoxication of power or victory itself. It breeds a kind of hubris, a belief that normal rules don't apply. Or maybe it's a genuine desire for magnanimity, to be seen as benevolent, which overrides strategic thinking. It could also be simple emotional bias. We want to trust those we like.
It's not just a moral feeling, perhaps, but a cognitive trap. We're wired to favor our friends.
Very possibly. But in Michael III's case, this misplaced trust, this blindness caused by friendship and affection, made him completely vulnerable. Basilius, given immense power and opportunity, eventually saw his chance. He murdered Michael in his sleep and usurped the throne.
A brutal outcome, but, as Greene would argue, entirely predictable within the dynamics of power. It highlights the danger of misplaced kindness and the ingratitude, or perhaps the ambition, that can fester even in the closest relationships, especially when power enters the equation.
Envy is a powerful motivator. Friends know your weaknesses, your flaws. They see your successes up close, which can breed resentment more easily than in someone more distant.
So the key takeaway for us, especially in professional settings, is that hiring friends or relying too heavily on them can be a liability.
Greene certainly argues that. Hiring friends can lead to awkwardness, resentment. They might feel chosen out of favoritism, not merit, which ironically diminishes their respect for you. Or they might feel entitled, expecting special treatment.
And working situations often require a certain professional distance, don't they?
They do. You need objectivity. Focus on skill, competence, reliability. Friendliness can easily obscure the fact that you're ultimately there to achieve specific goals, and sometimes tough decisions need to be made. Personal feelings complicate that.
Okay, so friends are dangerous. What about enemies? Greene says they're an untapped gold mine. How does that work?
Well, consider Talleyrand, Napoleon's brilliant but treacherous foreign minister. When Talleyrand decided the time was right to turn against Napoleon, he needed a powerful ally. Who did he choose?
Not a friend, I'm guessing.
Definitely not. He chose Joseph Fouché, the head of Napoleon's secret police, his most hated rival, a man he despised personally.
Wow. Why?
Because their relationship was untainted by personal feeling. It was based purely on mutual self-interest. their shared desire to see Napoleon fall and to secure their own futures. Fouché, as a former enemy now being brought into the fold, would have something to prove. He'd be fiercely loyal to the cause because his own survival depended on it.
So shared self-interest can be a much stronger glue than personal affection, especially in high-stakes power plays.
Often, yes. It's clearer, less ambiguous, and their alliance, though it didn't ultimately topple Napoleon immediately, generated immense power and fear. It showed that enemies can sharpen your wits, keep you focused. You know exactly where you stand.
Which reminds me of Mao Zedong. He seemed to thrive on conflict.
He absolutely did. Mao believed that without a worthy opponent, a person or a group couldn't really grow stronger. He famously said to a Japanese visitor who was apologizing for the wartime invasion,
"Can I not thank you instead?"
Exactly. He saw the conflict, the struggle against Japan, as something that had ultimately strengthened the Chinese communists, forged their army, and defined their cause. He actively encouraged disagreements, even with allies like the Soviet Union, to keep his own movement sharp and clearly defined.
So this raises another big question. Can conflict, even engineered conflict, actually be a necessary ingredient for growth and power?
Mao's strategy certainly suggests it can be, under certain circumstances. Having a sharply defined enemy, Greene notes, was a far stronger argument for Mao's side than any abstract ideology. It rallied people, focused their energy, created an us versus them dynamic that solidified internal cohesion and purpose. It's about strategically using opposition to strengthen your own position.
Fascinating. Okay, so managing relationships is key. What about managing information? That brings us to Law 3. Conceal your intentions. This seems absolutely fundamental to that idea of the indirect route to power.
It is. It's central. The judgment here is simple. Keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the true purpose behind your actions. If they don't know what you're really aiming for, they can't prepare defenses, they can't obstruct you effectively.
Balthazar Gracian again. Let your greatest cunning lie in covering up what looks like cunning.
Perfect. Make your intentions opaque.
The transgression example Greene gives of the Marquis and the Countess really highlights the danger of revealing too much. He builds up this elaborate, charming seduction.
Sending gifts, writing letters, orchestrating encounters.
Right. But the moment he utters the fatal word, love, everything changes. Suddenly, all his previous charming actions seem manipulative, ugly, and conniving.
The mask slips. His intention is revealed, and the Countess feels embarrassed, used, manipulated. The game is instantly over. His declaration destroyed the ambiguity, the charm. It shows us that once your true purpose is laid bare, you often lose your leverage, your allure.
So contrast that failure with Otto von Bismarck's deceptive speech back in 1850. This is a masterclass.
Absolutely. Bismarck was a fervent Prussian patriot. His ultimate goal was German unification, which he knew required war with Austria. But in 1850, the political climate and the king himself favored peace.
So what did Bismarck do?
He gave a public speech seemingly opposing war. He praised Austria, spoke movingly about the horrors of conflict, expressed sympathy for the peasants whose farms would be burned. He played the part of the reasonable peacemaker perfectly.
A complete deception. A whole country was fooled by his insincere words, Greene says.
Pretty much. And the outcome. The peace-loving Prussian king, King Frederick William IV, was immensely grateful for Bismarck's apparent stance. He saw him as a sensible ally against the warhawks. So he made Bismarck a cabinet minister.
Giving him a foothold in power.
Exactly. A few years later, Bismarck maneuvered himself into the position of Prussian premier, and then, from that position of power, he skillfully instigated and won the very war against Austria he had initially seemed to deplore, ultimately uniting Germany under Prussian leadership.
Incredible. He played the long game, using those insincere words as a perfect smokescreen to hide his true long-term ambition.
The practical application here is clear. Always have a larger, hidden agenda. Be willing to say or do things that seem to contradict it, just to put people off the scent, to lull them into a false sense of security.
The keys to power here seem rooted in exploiting basic human nature. Most people are pretty much open books, aren't they?
They tend to be. They chatter about their plans, their feelings. This makes them predictable. And predictability in the world of power means vulnerability. It doesn't inspire fear or respect.
And honesty, while valued socially, can be a blunt instrument in power plays.
Greene argues it often bloodies more than it cuts. It can offend, create unnecessary conflict, reveal too much. By concealing your intentions, you retain the element of surprise. You keep the upper hand. People's first instinct is generally to trust appearances.
So you can manipulate those appearances, dangle a false object of desire, a decoy goal, to divert their attention from your real purpose.
Precisely. That's the use of the decoy. And then there are smoke screens. As Greene says, deception is always the best strategy, but the best deceptions require a screen of smoke.
What kind of smoke screens work best?
Often, a bland, familiar exterior is perfect. The unreadable poker face. Appearing conventional, predictable, even a little boring can be the ideal way to hide unconventional or dangerous intentions. Think of Haile Selassie dealing with the powerful warlord Balcha.
Right. Selassie seemed charming, almost obsequious.
Exactly. He lulled Balcha into a false sense of security at a banquet. He allowed Balcha to bring an armed bodyguard, making him feel in control. But while Balcha was distracted by the feast and Selassie's apparent deference, Selassie's forces were miles away, disarming Balcha's main army.
A classic smokescreen. The banquet and the charm hid the real action.
And Greene notes that the paranoid and wary, like Balcha, are often the easiest to deceive. Win their trust in one small area, show vulnerability or sincerity in one aspect, and you create a smokescreen that blinds their view in another, more critical area. They focus on the small detail you allow them to see, missing the bigger picture.
This idea of concealment, of holding back, also ties directly into Law 4. Always say less than necessary. It's not just about concealing intentions, but controlling the flow of all information.
Absolutely. If revealing your intentions is dangerous, then just generally talking too much is also a liability. The judgment for Law 4 is clear. Saying less tends to make you appear greater, more powerful, more profound.
It creates discomfort in others.
It does. It forces them to fill the silence, to interpret your meaning, often projecting their own thoughts or fears onto you. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, was a master of this. His deliberate sparseness with words, his calculated silences.
It made everything in him valuable, as Greene puts it. It enhanced his majesty, kept his court constantly guessing, constantly in a state of low-level terror.
A powerful image, isn't it? His silence was a tool of control. As the Duc de Saint-Simon wrote, no one knew as well as he how to sell his words, his smile, even his glances. Everything was measured, rationed, making it seem more significant.
So the key to power here is about creating a sense of mystery around yourself.
Exactly. Your silence makes others uncomfortable because humans are, as Greene calls them, machines of interpretation and explanation. We hate ambiguity. When you carefully control what you reveal, people can't easily pierce your intentions or gauge your thoughts. This ambiguity creates an appearance of depth, meaning, and power, even if there's nothing particularly profound being hidden.
And practically speaking, less talk means less risk of saying something foolish.
Or even dangerous. The less you say, the less material you give others to use against you. The story of Kondraty Ryleyev, the Russian Decembrist revolutionary, is a stark, tragic example.
Ah, the execution story.
Right? He's on the gallows, the rope breaks, he falls. A miracle, perhaps. He could have kept quiet. But instead, he stands up and supposedly shouts something like, "You see, in Russia, they don't even know how to make rope."
A fatal mistake.
Utterly fatal. His words were reported back to the Tsar, who was possibly considering clemency. But the insult, that sealed Ryleyev's fate. He was promptly hanged again, this time successfully. His unnecessary words killed him.
It really underscores the potential danger of speaking too much, especially when under pressure. On the flip side, though, you mentioned artists like Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp.
Yes, they used ambiguity strategically. They gave vague, often contradictory statements about their work. They allowed others, the critics, the public, to project meaning onto it.
Which increased its perceived depth and value.
Immensely. By saying less, by refusing to provide easy answers, they made their art seem infinitely more profound, more open to interpretation. They controlled the narrative by not providing one, letting the silence and ambiguity work for them.
But there's a reversal here too, right? Silence isn't always golden.
Correct. Sometimes silence can arouse suspicion, especially in superiors who might interpret it as discontent or plotting. A vague comment intended to be noncommittal could be wildly misinterpreted. Context is everything.
So sometimes it's better to talk, even if it's nonsense.
Greene suggests that sometimes it's wiser to play the court jester talk a lot, seem harmless, perhaps even foolish, but be smarter than you appear, or use words to distract and obfuscate, rather than remain silent. The key is knowing when to use silence and when to speak, and what kind of speech to use. It's a flexible tool, not an absolute command.
Okay, so we've covered managing superiors, friends versus enemies, concealing intentions, and controlling your words. What about managing your overall public image? Law 5. So much depends on reputation guard it with your life. This feels like almost common sense, but Greene takes it much further.
He really elevates it. Reputation, he argues, is the absolute cornerstone of power. It's not just helpful, it's essential. Through reputation alone, you can intimidate rivals, attract allies, and win victories before any action is even taken.
It precedes you.
Exactly. Once it slips, though, you become incredibly vulnerable. Attacks will come from all sides. A strong reputation is like invisible armor. Lose it, and you're exposed.
The fable Greene uses Jean de La Fontaine's story of the animals suffering from plague and the poor ass. That's a grim illustration.
It really is. All the powerful animals confess to terrible sins, the lion eating sheep, the tiger eating men, but they're excused because of their status, their reputation.
Yeah.
But the poor ass confesses to the tiniest transgression, nibbling a bit of grass from a monastery lawn.
A minor offense.
Objectively, yes. But because the ass has no status, no powerful reputation, this minor fault is seized upon. He's declared the cause of the plague, judged gallows bait, and sacrificed. It brutally illustrates how public opinion condemns or sanctifies based almost entirely on reputation and status, often regardless of the actual facts or the severity of the transgression.
So the hard lesson here is that your reputation, how people perceive you, can matter more than your actual actions or intentions.
In the court of public opinion, and often in the realm of power, yes. Perception becomes reality.
And P.T. Barnum, the great American showman, is Greene's prime observance example here. He built his reputation from nothing.
He's a fascinating case study in reputation management. In 1841, he had no money, no museum, and crucially, no reputation. He tried to buy an existing museum, but lost out to a competitor who did have a strong reputation. Barnum realized then, as he wrote later, Peale's had a reputation and Barnum had none. That was the difference.
So he set out to build one.
By constantly attracting attention, any attention, even negative attention. He understood that being talked about, being conspicuous, was the foundation. He embraced controversy, even calling himself the Prince of Humbugs. He orchestrated hoaxes, generated publicity stunts.
Didn't he even write anonymous attacks on his own work?
He did, just to stir up controversy and get people talking. Because as he knew, the worst fate in the world for a man who yearns fame is to be ignored. His genius lay in realizing that all attention, positive or negative, could be harnessed to build his reputation as America's premier showman. Being notorious was better than being unknown.
So the key is building a distinct image, attaching your name to a specific quality, a recognizable style, even a personality quirk, something that sets you apart and establishes your place in the sky for your star, as Greene puts it.
Precisely. And once established, you guard it fiercely. Think of Henry Kissinger. His reputation as the master negotiator, the man who could iron out intractable differences, became so powerful that peace treaties often seemed like a fait accompli, simply because he was involved. His reputation did half the work for him.
The practical application seems to be consciously craft the narrative about yourself. Be mindful always of how you are perceived and proactively shape that perception.
Yes. And Greene adds another layer, attacking others' reputations. It can be a potent weapon, especially if you have less power initially. Your target, being more established, has more to lose from a damaged reputation.
But that's dangerous too, right? It could backfire.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It must be done skillfully, often indirectly, perhaps using third parties, so it doesn't obviously trace back to you and ruin your own reputation in the process. It's a double-edged sword that requires immense care and calculation. You don't want to be seen as merely malicious.
Okay, let's shift gears from defense and reputation to more offensive, proactive strategies. Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. This one sounds particularly ruthless.
It is ruthless, but Greene argues it's born of pragmatism, not cruelty. The judgment is stark. If you leave even a single ember glowing, it will eventually reignite. More is lost, historically, through stopping halfway, through incomplete victories, than through total annihilation of your enemy.
Because the enemy will recover.
They will recover, regroup, and seek revenge. Mercy shown to a defeated but still potentially dangerous foe is often a strategic blunder. Moses understood this, Greene points out, as did many leaders since. In a true power struggle, the only lasting safety comes from the complete elimination of the threat.
The story of Shang Yu and Liu Pang in ancient China is a classic transgression of this law.
A painful illustration. Shang Yu had Liu Pang defeated, cornered multiple times, despite his advisor Fan Zhang desperately warning him, crush him now. Xiang Yu showed mercy. He let Liu Pang escape.
Why, again, that question of mercy. Was it honor?
Arrogance. Probably a combination. Maybe Xiang Yu felt Liu Pang was no longer a threat, or perhaps he wanted to appear magnanimous. Whatever the reason, it was strategically disastrous. Liu Pang used each reprieve to escape, gather forces, learn from his mistakes, and ultimately he returned to utterly defeat Xiang Yu. Xiang Yu's mercy led directly to his own downfall.
So that earlier question about why leaders show mercy, maybe it's often rooted in underestimation or a failure to think through the long-term consequences.
That seems likely. Hubris, born of victory, a desire for quick glory or acclaim, blinding them to the fact that a wounded enemy is often the most dangerous.
On the flip side, the Empress Wu of China, she was in observance of this law.
Oh, absolutely. Empress Wu was terrifyingly effective. Her rise and reign were marked by the ruthless, systematic, total annihilation of any potential rival. Anyone who could possibly threaten her power, she eliminated.
Even her own family.
Even her own children. She allegedly poisoned a niece who was a rival for the emperor's affection. She had her own eldest son, the crown prince, accused of treason and exiled, where he was forced to commit suicide. She ensured her youngest, most pliable son became emperor so she could continue ruling through him. She left no embers glowing.
Chillingly effective.
And then there's Cesare Borgia's famous magnificent deceit at Senigallia, another masterclass in crushing enemies.
He lured his treacherous mercenary captains, the condottieri, into a trap.
Precisely. They had plotted against him. He pretended reconciliation, invited them to the town of Senigallia for a celebratory feast, making them believe he was weak, forgiving, perhaps even foolish. He used a perfect smokescreen, the false promise of renewed alliance and easy negotiations.
And walked right into it.
They dismissed their own troops, entered the town feeling secure, triumphant even, and Borgia. He had them seized and strangled that very night. Total annihilation under the guise of reconciliation.
So the key takeaway here is stark. In serious power struggles, enemies will emerge. Don't personalize their hatred. Just recognize the strategic reality. No lasting peace is possible as long as they pose a threat.
And waiting for them to reveal their plans fully, waiting for them to strike first, is often silly, as Greene puts it. By then, it might be too late. You seize the initiative, and when you strike decisively to eliminate the threat completely.
Okay, moving from outright conflict to more subtle forms of control. Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. How does this work?
The logic is simple. Predictable patterns allow enemies to anticipate your moves and plan against you. Predictability makes you vulnerable. Being deliberately unpredictable, on the other hand, keeps them constantly off balance, guessing, and fearful.
Like Bobby Fischer in his chess match against Boris Spassky.
A perfect example from a different arena. Fischer was known for certain openings, certain patterns. Leading up to the 1972 World Championship, Spassky's team meticulously analyzed Fischer's predictable style. So what did Fischer do in the match?
He changed everything.
Completely. He used openings he'd never used before. He made seemingly illogical moves. He even forfeited the second game. He kept Spassky utterly confused, unable to rely on his preparation. Fischer understood that disrupting his opponent's mental equilibrium was as crucial as the moves on the board. Unpredictability was his weapon.
And it worked. He won the championship.
It did. Similarly, Filippo Maria Visconti, the Duke of Milan in the 15th century, ruled supreme, unchallenged, and at peace, according to Machiavelli, largely by cultivating an air of extreme unpredictability. His moods shifted wildly, his desires were inconsistent, his plans changed constantly.
So no one knew where they stood.
Ever. Everyone around him was forced to constantly guess, constantly try to anticipate his next whim. They had to essentially surrender to his will because they could never get a firm grasp on it. His unpredictability created confusion and paralysis in potential rivals.
Stonewall Jackson during the American Civil War used similar tactics, right? His inexplicable moves.
Absolutely. Jackson's marches and attacks often seemed illogical, even reckless, to the Union generals opposing him. But his unpredictable movements consistently confused them, disrupted their plans, allowed the smaller Confederate forces to achieve strategic surprise and reinforce key positions. He lived by his own advice: always mystify, mislead, and surprise the enemy.
The underlying psychological effect seems to be exhaustion and fear in the opponent. They can't relax, they can't plan confidently.
Exactly. And Muhammad Ali used this brilliantly against George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle.
The rope-a-dope fight.
Right, but before that, Ali played mind games. He was known for his dancing style, his speed. But pre-fight, he boasted he was going to change his style, stand toe-to-toe, and punch it out with the fearsome Foreman. He even had his trainer publicly loosen the ring ropes, suggesting he wanted to lean back and slug it out.
A total bluff.
A brilliant, deceptive ploy. It made Foreman and his team potentially underestimate Ali's usual strategy, maybe abandon their own game plan focused on cutting off the ring. Ali used the threat of unpredictability as a weapon to get inside Foreman's head before the first bell even rang.
So the keys to power here are clear. Unpredictability works for both the powerful and the underdog. It confuses enemies, makes them prone to errors, and creates an aura of menace because the unknown is always more frightening than the known.
It keeps the initiative firmly in your hands.
This idea of unpredictability can also link to appearing less intelligent than you are, which you mentioned earlier, Law 21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker, seem dumber than your mark. Let's delve into that one.
Right. This is a specific form of deceptive appearance. The judgment is that deliberately appearing less intelligent, less sophisticated than your target can be the ultimate form of deception. It's the old tactic of masquerading as a swine to kill the tiger.
Why does it work so well?
Because it plays directly on people's arrogance and vanity. Overconfident, intelligent people often love to feel smarter than others. They underestimate those they perceive as less intelligent, letting their guard down completely. They become easy targets.
The story of Arnold and Slack and the Great Diamond Mine hoax is a perfect example.
A truly classic con. These two grizzled, seemingly simple prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, turn up in San Francisco in 1872 with a bag of uncut diamonds. They appear naive, rough around the edges, almost comically unsophisticated.
And they managed to convince some of the most sophisticated financiers on the West Coast, people like William Ralston, the founder of the Bank of California.
Exactly. These powerful financiers, blinded by greed and their own sense of superiority, were practically laughing at these simple prospectors behind their backs. They felt they were easily manipulating Arnold and Slack into selling shares in a supposedly rich diamond field. They paid an enormous sum, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a fortune back then.
But the diamond field was fake.
Completely fake. Arnold and Slack had salted a remote location with cheap, industrial-grade diamonds. The financiers, so sure of their own cleverness, barely did any due diligence. Arnold and Slack walked away rich, having played the naive fools perfectly. The financiers were laughing at them, but as Greene notes, the prospectors laughed loudest and longest. Their feigned simplicity was the perfect camouflage for their elaborate fraud.
Otto von Bismarck used a similar tactic, didn't he? Before crucial negotiations.
He did, against the Austrian negotiator Count Blum, before the talks that eventually led to the Austro-Prussian War. They were playing cards, a game called Kins. Bismarck deliberately played like a reckless, witless fool. He made rash bets, seemed easily flustered, lost heavily.
Why?
To make Count Blum completely underestimate him. Blum left the card game thinking Bismarck was impulsive, perhaps not very bright, certainly not a serious threat in the upcoming political negotiations. It gave Bismarck a critical psychological advantage when the real talks began. He had lowered Blum's guard.
So the keys to power here involve understanding that appearing harmless, even foolish, can be incredibly advantageous.
Yes. Think of Claudius, playing the stammering fool for years to survive the deadly intrigues of the Roman court, only to emerge as emperor. Or Louis XIII of France, as a young man, seeming interested only in hunting, allowing Cardinal Richelieu to underestimate him until Louis decisively asserted his own power.
It's about downplaying your intelligence, your sophistication, your ambition, letting others feel superior.
Exactly. As Arnold and Slack showed, an air of complete naivete can work wonders. People keep you around because you don't threaten them. You make them feel smarter, more powerful. And the longer you're around, the more you observe, the more opportunities you have to manipulate or strike when the time is right. It's often a long-game deception, requiring patience and excellent acting skills.
This whole theme of strategic dissimulation, of hiding your true self, your true intentions, your true intelligence, it runs so deep through these laws. It allows people to underestimate you, and being underestimated is often a position of immense potential power.
It truly is. It allows you to operate under the radar until you're ready to make your move.
Okay, let's consider another crucial aspect of navigating power dynamics. Managing the fallout from your actions, especially the unpleasant ones. Law 26. Keep your hands clean.
This is about maintaining appearances, specifically the appearance of civility, efficiency, and moral uprightness, even when you're involved in dirty work. The judgment is never appear soiled by mistakes or nasty deeds. Use scapegoats. Use intermediaries, what Greene calls cat's paws, to disguise your involvement.
The ancient practice of scapegoating comes to mind immediately.
Exactly. The Hebrew ritual of sending a goat into the wilderness bearing the sins of the people, or the ancient Athenians sometimes sacrificing individuals during plagues or famines to purify the city. It's about transferring guilt and blame onto an external figure, allowing the community or the leader to remain clean.
So it's about maintaining that public facade of innocence, even if you're the one pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Precisely. And Cleopatra was a master of this.
How so?
She wanted to rule Egypt alone, but she shared the throne initially with her younger brother, Ptolemy the 13th, and later faced threats from her sister Arsinoe. She needed him out of the way, but couldn't afford to be seen as a ruthless tyrant, especially not by her Roman allies, like Caesar.
So what did she do?
She skillfully manipulated Caesar. When Ptolemy was Caesar's prisoner, she persuaded Caesar to release him, knowing full well that Ptolemy would immediately raise an army and fight Caesar, and, indirectly, her. When Ptolemy was eventually defeated and drowned, and later when Arsinoe was also eliminated, likely on Cleopatra's subtle urging, but carried out by Mark Antony, Cleopatra herself appeared uninvolved.
Caesar and Antony became the agents of misfortune, the ones with blood on their hands.
Exactly. Cleopatra orchestrated the conflicts that eliminated her siblings, but she kept her own hands spotlessly clean, maintaining her image and her grip on power. She let others do the dirty work and take the blame.
La Fontaine's fable, A Fool and a Wise Man, illustrates a similar principle on a smaller scale, doesn't it? Redirecting a problem.
Yes. The wise man is bothered by a fool. Instead of confronting the fool directly, which might be messy, the wise man cleverly persuades the fool to go bother someone else, someone powerful enough to punish the fool severely. The wise man solves his problem indirectly, keeps his hands clean, and lets someone else handle the unpleasantness.
So the key to power here is never appear as the direct agent of unpleasant or controversial actions. Find scapegoats to take the blame for mistakes. Find cat's paws intermediaries who can do the dirty work for you without realizing they're being used, or who are willing to take the risk.
Like the General Chuko Liang in ancient China using straw-covered boats.
Ah, the arrow collecting trick.
Right. He needed arrows but didn't want to risk his own men.
Yeah.
So he sent boats covered in straw dummies out into the fog towards the enemy camp.
Ah.
The enemy, thinking it was a real attack, rained arrows onto the boats. Chuko Liang collected thousands of arrows without risking a single soldier, making the enemy his unwitting supplier. The enemy archers were his cat's paw.
Brilliant. But using scapegoats and cat's paws must have risks too. What's the reversal?
The main risk is discovery. If your manipulation is revealed, the blame will fall doubly hard on you. You'll look deceitful and cowardly. So it requires great subtlety. However, Greene notes a possible reversal. If you are already very secure in your power, sometimes deliberately taking the blame for a mistake, even one made by a subordinate, can actually be advantageous.
How so?
It can make you appear responsible, penitent, even humble. It can actually foster loyalty and goodwill if your position is strong enough that admitting a fault doesn't significantly weaken you. It's a calculated move, showing you're big enough to own a mistake, which can paradoxically enhance your authority. But you need to be sure of your standing first.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift now to a broader strategic principle, one that requires looking far ahead. Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. This sounds simple, but feels profound.
It is. It's about comprehensive foresight, thinking beyond the immediate step. The judgment is clear. The ending is everything. Don't just plan the opening moves. Plan all the way to the conclusion, considering all possible consequences, obstacles, and twists of fortune along the way.
The fable Greene uses, the king, the Sufi, and the surgeon, really drives this home.
A great little story. The king is about to be bled by his surgeon. A Sufi mystic gives the king a basin inscribed with the advice, never begin anything until you have reflected what will be the end of it.
And the surgeon sees this inscription.
Yes. As he prepares his lancet, he sees the words on the basin the king holds. It makes him pause and think about the consequences if he proceeds with his secret plan, which was to use a poisoned lancet to assassinate the king. Reflecting on the likely end for himself, swift execution, he loses his nerve and confesses. The Sufi's advice, prompting reflection on the end, saved the king's life.
It highlights exactly why thorough planning, thinking through the consequences, is so crucial. It can reveal hidden dangers or unintended outcomes before you commit.
Absolutely. The keys to power here involve cultivating what Greene calls a godlike foresight. Those who plan ahead, who seem to anticipate events, appear to defy fate. Most people, he argues, are imprisoned in the moment. They react impulsively, swayed by immediate desires or fears.
They focus only on the happy ending they want, ignoring the potential pitfalls.
Exactly. They get deluded by their desires. True planners, like Bismarck, whose entire career Greene presents as a testament to planning to the end.
He always seemed several steps ahead.
Always. He anticipated obstacles, planned for contingencies, maneuvered patiently towards his long-term goals, secured his victories, and importantly, knew when to withdraw before overreaching. He played the whole game, not just the opening.
The transgression example of the rebellion against Louis XIV in France, the Fronde, shows the danger of not thinking to the end.
Right. The revolutionaries, the nobles opposing the young king and Mazarin, managed to force Louis and his court to flee Paris. They sighed with relief, thinking they had won.
But they hadn't thought it through.
They hadn't considered the consequences of the king's absence. By forcing him out, they actually gave him freedom, room to maneuver, rally support in the provinces, and ultimately return to crush the rebellion completely. Their short-sighted focus on the immediate victory of driving him out led to their ultimate defeat.
Cardinal de Retz, one of the Fronde leaders, later reflected on this, didn't he? Something about fearing present dangers too much.
Yes, he wrote, "The most ordinary cause of people's mistakes is their being too much frightened at the present danger, and not enough so at that which is remote." They reacted to the immediate threat in Paris, but failed to anticipate the long-term strategic danger they created by letting the king escape their immediate control.
This really connects back to the listener, doesn't it? How often do you, listening now, truly think things all the way to the end? Beyond the immediate goal, the desired outcome, do you consider all the potential ripples, the pitfalls, the unintended consequences?
It's a challenging discipline. This law is about overcoming that very human, very common tendency for short-term thinking, for chasing instant gratification without considering the full trajectory. It requires patience and intellectual rigor.
And that strategic foresight, that ability to think long-term, applies not just to your grand plans, but also to how you interact with others on a deeper, more psychological level. Which brings us neatly to Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. This is about influence through seduction, not force.
Precisely. The judgment here is that coercion, brute force, inevitably creates resentment and resistance, which will eventually turn against you. True, lasting power comes from seducing others, making them want to do what you want them to do. How? By appealing to their individual psychologies, their emotions, their weaknesses, their self-interest.
Ignore their hearts and minds, and they will grow to hate you.
That's the warning. Marie Antoinette is Greene's primary transgression example here. Initially, she was popular when she arrived in France, but she completely failed to connect with the common people, or even understand their needs and sentiments.
She seemed aloof, absorbed in her own lavish world at Versailles.
Exactly. Indulging in extravagant fashions, building her fantasy village, seemingly oblivious to the suffering outside the palace gates. Her actions, her perceived indifference, gradually turned popularity into suspicion, then resentment, then outright hatred. When the revolution came, Greene notes, hardly a soul came to her defense.
Because she had utterly failed to win their hearts and minds. Her power was built on position, not connection, making it fragile.
It demonstrates vividly why ignoring hearts and minds ultimately leads to isolation and hatred. It breeds a deep detachment and resentment that makes your position incredibly precarious when times get tough.
Now contrast her failure with the incredible observance example of Zhuge Liang and his handling of Meng Huo, the leader of the southern barbarians.
Ah, yes, a brilliant display of psychological warfare over brute force. Zhuge Liang needed to pacify the southern region for his kingdom. He faced Meng Huo, a proud and influential local leader. Liang defeated and captured Meng Huo not once, but 7 times.
And each time he released him.
Each time. He treated Meng Huo with respect, appealed to his sense of honor, demonstrated mercy and superior strategy, rather than just executing him. He was working on Meng Huo's mind and heart.
What was the result?
After the 7th capture and release, Meng Huo was completely broken psychologically, utterly convinced of Liang's superiority and righteousness. Greene quotes the historical account. Meng Huo, sobbing, fell to the ground, crawled, and prostrated himself at his feet, pledging eternal loyalty. He became Liang's loyal pawn, pacifying the entire region for him. Liang won not just a military victory, but a lasting political one by conquering his enemy's spirit.
That's incredible. It shows the sheer power of psychological manipulation over physical force. Alexander the Great also understood this, didn't he, with his soldiers?
Plutarch tells that story where Alexander, on a grueling march, is offered the last bit of water found, carried in a helmet. His men are desperately thirsty. Alexander, seeing their state, refuses to drink unless they can all drink. He pours the water onto the ground.
What effect did that have?
Immense. Plutarch says the soldiers felt invigorated, as if they were little less than immortal. That single act of shared hardship, of putting their knees before his own comfort, inspired incredible loyalty and devotion. He wasn't just their commander, he had captured their hearts. The essence here isn't just about what you give people, but about how you make them feel.
So the keys to power here involve moving beyond just logic and argument. Verbal persuasion has limits.
Definitely. You need to appeal directly to emotions, fears, vanities, deeply held desires. Zhuge Liang, in another instance, supposedly stirred a rival general to action by subtly suggesting that the enemy leader, Cao Cao, was motivated by a desire for the general's beautiful wife. He bypassed reason and hit an emotional nerve.
And Greene talks about the Narcissus effect here, the power of mirroring.
Yes, this is a hugely powerful seductive technique. It involves subtly mirroring others' moods, their values, their tastes, even their body language. Making yourself appear as a kind of mirror image of their ideal self, or reflecting back their own deepest, often unexpressed desires.
Why is that so effective?
Because it taps into fundamental human narcissism, our inherent self-love. Most people rarely experience someone truly understanding or reflecting their inner world. When someone seems to do that, it's incredibly disarming, deeply seductive. It makes the mirror seem empathetic, kindred, uniquely attuned to them.
Like Alcibiades, the Athenian general and politician, he was a chameleon.
The ultimate chameleon. Alcibiades could effortlessly adapt his persona. When he was with the austere, disciplined Spartans, he adopted their simple lifestyle, trained rigorously, won their admiration. When he fled to Persia, he embraced their lavish customs, luxury, and flattery, charming the Persian satrap.
All while secretly working for his own interests, or Athens's.
Often, yes. He mirrored whoever he was with to gain their trust and influence, constantly adapting his mask to seduce and disarm. He understood intuitively that people love to see themselves or their ideals reflected back at them.
It's a form of deep psychological connection, or at least the appearance of it.
Exactly. And Greene details other forms of mirroring, too. The moral mirror, making someone see their own unpleasant behavior reflected back. The deceiver's mirror, creating a fake reality that mirrors the target's desires, like Yellow Kid Whale's fake bank. It's all about understanding and playing on the target's psychology, working on their heart and mind, not just trying to coerce their actions.
It seems so much more potent, if done well.
And much more lasting than force.
Okay, finally, let's turn to a law that's about restraint, particularly in moments of triumph. Law 47. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop.
This is crucial, and often overlooked in the flush of success. The judgment is stark. The moment of victory is often the most dangerous moment. Arrogance, overconfidence, the desire for more glory can lead you to overreach, push too far, create new enemies, and ultimately sow the seeds of your own downfall.
Like King Cyrus after conquering Babylon, his arrogant act.
Yes, Greene uses that story. After his great victory, Cyrus became enraged when one of his sacred white horses drowned crossing a river. In his fury and arrogance, he ordered his army to spend months diverting the entire river into 360 channels, effectively destroying it as punishment.
An act of supreme hubris.
Exactly. It symbolized his overreach, his loss of perspective after victory. And Greene suggests it marked the beginning of the end, foreshadowing the eventual unraveling of the vast Persian Empire due to its own overextension. It's a powerful metaphor for why you should always stop at the right mark. Hubris in victory is often the precursor to decline.
Victory is intoxicating, but dangerous. History is littered with empires that collapse because they overextended, isn't it?
Absolutely. The Assyrian Empire, ancient Athens invading Sicily during the Peloponnesian War. Success breeds ambition, ambition can lead to recklessness, recklessness leads to ruin. Knowing when you've achieved your objective and consolidating your gains is often wiser than pushing relentlessly forward.
Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's powerful mistress, seems to be an example of someone who did learn when to stop, or at least when to adapt.
Yes, she's an interesting case. After securing her position as the king's official mistress and gaining immense political influence, she understood the precariousness of her situation. She didn't push too hard. She cultivated allies, even befriended the queen, which was a smart move.
And when her direct physical relationship with the king waned,
she adapted. She accepted her loss of bedroom power gracefully, focusing instead on maintaining her role as his indispensable friend, advisor, and confidant. She even helped arrange other lovers for him. She knew when to step back from certain battles, even withdrew from public affairs when criticism became too intense, all to preserve her core influence in the court. She demonstrated a keen sense of when to advance, when to hold, and when to pull back.
Pericles, the great Athenian statesman in general, also seems to have understood this need for restraint.
He did. After significant naval victories, the Athenian populace was often eager for more conquest, more expansion, but Pericles consistently reined in their ambitions. He understood the dangers of overreaching.
So he fed their desire for glory with smaller, winnable battles.
Exactly. He created the appearance of constant momentum and success, keeping morale high, but without committing Athens to potentially ruinous, large-scale campaigns far from home. He managed expectations and ambition brilliantly. It's telling that after his death, less cautious demagogues took over, led Athens into the disastrous Sicilian expedition, and ultimately caused the city's downfall. They lacked his crucial sense of limits.
So it ties back to Law 15. In a way, Machiavelli said, either destroy a man or leave him alone entirely. Here it's about knowing the scope of your victory. Crush the designated enemy, yes, but don't needlessly create new enemies by pushing beyond your original goal.
That's a great connection. It's about defining the objective clearly, achieving it decisively, and then knowing when to stop, consolidate, and avoid provoking unnecessary further conflict. Don't let the momentum of victory carry you past the point of prudence.
Greene uses the metaphor of the game, Go, contrasting it with chess, to illustrate a more nuanced approach to victory and control.
Yes, it's a fascinating comparison. Chess is often about direct confrontation, capturing pieces, checkmating the king. Go is much more about territory, influence, surrounding the opponent, achieving strategic dominance across the whole board.
It's less about aggression, more about mobility and paralysis.
Exactly. Thinking in larger terms, being willing to sacrifice pieces or small areas to gain a larger strategic advantage. It's about fluidity, envelopment, and achieving a state where the opponent has no good moves left. It demonstrates a more subtle, long-term approach to victory and control, focusing on lasting influence rather than just immediate destructive conquest. Mastering when to stop, when to consolidate, when to flow around obstacles, that's the higher form of power strategy, like a Go master.
Okay, we've covered a fair number of these laws now, really diving into the mechanics and the thinking behind them. It's an intricate, sometimes disturbing, but undeniably fascinating picture Robert Greene paints.
It really is. And you start to see how the laws interconnect, forming this complex tapestry of human interaction and influence.
So boiling it all down, the essence of power, as Greene presents it in the 48 Laws of Power, seems to be that it's fundamentally a game of appearances, of strategic maneuvering, and requiring a deep, often quite dispassionate understanding of human psychology.
Yes. It's rarely about overt brute force or loud declarations. It's much more often about subtle influence, indirection, and control achieved through psychological insight.
And for you listening, what are the key takeaways? If you wanted to distill the essence of this worldview, what should you keep in mind?
I think there are a few core principles that run through almost all the laws. First, and maybe most importantly, is mastery of self. The ability to control your own emotions, to cultivate patience, to plan far ahead.
Why is that so paramount?
Because it allows you to observe others dispassionately. It enables you to react strategically, thoughtfully, rather than impulsively or emotionally. If you're constantly reacting based on your own feelings, you're predictable, you're easily manipulated. Self-control is the foundation.
Okay, mastery of self. What's second?
Second, a deep understanding of human nature. The laws consistently highlight recurring human weaknesses and motivations. Vanity, insecurity, greed, envy, the powerful yearning for belief, the desire for validation.
You need to recognize these in others to anticipate their actions, maybe exploit them strategically,
Right.
but also guard against them in yourself, right?
Absolutely. Why is this understanding crucial? Because people will always be susceptible to appeals to their deepest desires, fears, and insecurities. Knowing this allows you to predict behavior, to protect yourself from manipulation, and potentially to influence others more effectively.
Third key takeaway.
Third, the power of appearance versus reality. This is huge in Greene's framework. What you seem to be is often far more important than what you actually are.
Why? Why does appearance trump reality so often in power dynamics?
Because appearances shape perception. And in the realm of power, perception is reality. People react to the image you project, the story you tell, the mask you wear, not necessarily to your true self or your hidden intentions. Controlling appearances means controlling how others react to you.
Okay.
Fourth, the importance of indirectness and subtlety. The most effective power maneuvers are often the most disguised, the least obvious,
Why is indirectness superior to direct action?
because it prevents resentment and resistance. If people don't realize they're being manipulated or steered in a certain direction, they can't fight back effectively. Direct confrontation creates enemies and opposition. Subtlety allows you to bend others to your will, sometimes without them even noticing until it's too late. It creates willing pawns rather than bitter opponents.
And
Finally, adaptability. The ability to be fluid, to play many roles, to change your tactics based on the circumstances and the people you're dealing with. To remain, as Greene puts it in the context of the final law, formless.
why is adaptability so critical?
Because rigidity leads to vulnerability. The world changes, circumstances change, people change. If you're stuck in one mode of behavior, one strategy, you become predictable and easily broken. The powerful are fluid, constantly adjusting their approach, like water finding the path of least resistance or reshaping itself to fit any container.
So, mastery of self, understanding human nature, appearance versus reality, indirectness, and adaptability. Those seem like the pillars.
I think they capture the core essence, yes.
And it's important to reiterate, isn't it, that the 48 Laws of Power is far more than just a cynical handbook for manipulation.
Absolutely. While it can certainly be read that way, its real value lies in providing a powerful lens through which to understand history, to decode human behavior, to recognize the hidden forces that shape our social and professional worlds. It's fundamentally a tool for awareness.
So you can recognize these dynamics when they're being used on you, or simply understand why certain people succeed and others fail in situations involving influence.
Precisely. Its lasting value lies in its timeless, often uncomfortable insights into human nature. These laws aren't confined to historical courts or political battlefields. They play out constantly in boardrooms and social circles, even within families. The book offers a profound, if sometimes unsettling, education in how the world really works, not just how we wish it would.
So our final thought for you today. If knowledge is power, as the saying goes, and these laws arguably unlock a deeper, perhaps darker understanding of human nature and the mechanics of influence, how will you choose to use this insight in your own life? What stands out to you as the most surprising or maybe the most valuable lesson from this deep dive into the often shadowy art of power?